The next order of business was to find a good kung fu teacher. I first went to the head office of the World Guoshu Federation. Since I was a member of the North American branch, I thought they would be able to help. As it turned out, they could provide only 3 names and addresses of kung fu teachers in the city. The first school I visited was in the old section of town near the Danshui River. This was also the Taiwanese district where they spoke the Fujian dialect, as opposed to the Mandarin-speaking invaders from the mainland. The buildings dated back to the Japanese occupation, and the streets were narrow and overhung with so many signs, lights, and electrical lines that it blocked out the sunlight. The first thing that aroused my suspicions about the place was the rust-stained sidewalk. These stains were caused by the spit of those chewing betel nut. The betel nut is chewed as a mild stimulant, comparable to a triple espresso coffee, and its juices were blood red that eventually stained the chewer's teeth red. The spit was highly acidic and so corrosive that it is known to eat right through car paint. Betel nut was a habit of the lower classes and especially popular among gangsters. The spattered sidewalk spoke of groups of men hanging out in front of the club for hours, spitting betel juice all over the place. Not a good sign. The club was housed in another concrete box that was decorated with a phony half-round column facade painted red, black, and gold. Near the front door, behind a plexiglass case, were several pictures featuring a middle-aged, puffy Oriental man with Vaseline slick hair and wearing garish rhinestone sunglasses. All the pictures showed him wearing a 3-piece black pinstripe suit, white tie, and a white carnation in his lapel. In one photo, he's pictured standing calmly with one arm outstretched, while no fewer than 7 burly men are shown to be flying backwards through the air. "One hand can kill 7, or some such nonsense was the caption. In another photo, he was sporting a white fedora with a black hatband, cape, and a cane. He looked like an aging gay godfather. I didn't bother going in. The second club was located in the Central District just south of Roosevelt Drive. The front of this box was dressed to resemble a medicine shop with pictures of the bagua and diagrams of the human body showing anatomical acupuncture points. To one side of the front door was a glass case that housed photos of the graduating students. These were all Chinese men in their 50s and 60s. The photos showed these gray and balding men dressed in only a towel wrapped around their waists. They were shown standing with each foot resting on a pile of bricks stacked 4 high. They stood with their legs apart, and hanging between their legs was a rope, one end of which was attached to a 10-pound dumbbell. Their little wrinkled faces showed determination or pain. It was difficult to tell which. This was a kung fu school, all right, but it was of an obscure style known under the category as nei gong, internal or hidden art. These old men were practicing a life-renewing exercise known as bone marrow washing, which reputedly uses the body's internal energy, its qi, to cleanse the bone marrow of impurities. The final examination in this program involved lifting a heavy weight with your testicles. That's what the other end of the rope was tied to. I didn't bother going in. The third school was located near Taipei Normal University. This concrete box looked more like a kung fu school. There was a large sign with a black silhouette of a guy doing a flying sidekick. Mounted on brackets jutting out beside the front door was a large, rusty guandao, the sign of a fighting kung fu school. On the other side of the door was again a plexiglass picture case with photos. These showed an Oriental man in his late 30s in various kung fu poses. I could tell from the postures that the style he taught was Tang Lung, or praying mantis. The door was open, and I went in. I walked into an empty room the size of a 2-car garage. The walls were completely covered in little yellow and white tiles. They were so shiny I wasn't sure if they were wet or dry. The room sported the usual accoutrements: heavy bag, weapons rack, dumbbells, and an altar to the god of war, Guan Gong. A side door led to the connecting hallway and then the living quarters. Squatting in the hallway beside several large plastic buckets was a woman doing the laundry. She looked at me and nodded. Then, turning towards the living quarters, she yelled out. The master appeared. He was older than the photos, perhaps in his mid-40s. He had a puffy, acne-scarred face, and his thin hair clung wet to his balding forehead from the humidity. He wore a dirty white undershirt and gray jogging pants that were horribly stretched out of shape so that it sagged around his knees and butt. The muscles in his arms and shoulders were soft and thin, and he sported a pot belly. A cigarette dangled from his mouth, and he scratched his groin. I berated myself for the quick judgment. Don't judge a book by its cover, I thought to myself. I had already gotten used to the Chinese way of practicing kung fu. The crisp, clean uniforms, the colored sashes, the patches and mythical symbols emblazoned on the breast or back was strictly a North American phenomenon. Chinese students practiced in tracksuits or shorts and t-shirt, sometimes in just their boxers. Chinese who actually dressed like a typical North American karate student were show people, traveling acrobats and opera troupes. In Hong Kong, I once wore a plain black kung fu jacket to class, and I was greeted with awe and admiration as though I were showing off my wedding tux. There were some playful jibes like, "Where will you be performing tonight, Master Dragon?" and "Allow us to kowtow to the Manchu Prince." It was akin to an Oriental who takes riding lessons dressed like a rhinestone cowboy. I wore only black cotton pants and a t-shirt ever after, which, by local standards, was considered formal wear nevertheless. Master Tsai, I named him for the wet spot near his groin, could speak enough English to explain when the scheduled classes are, and that one of the students could speak better English than he. I thanked him and prepared to leave, but I guess he sensed I wouldn't be coming back, so he stopped me and began to demonstrate some routines. He wasn't terrible. I thanked him again after he was finished and left to think about it. It was rather far from where I lived, clear across the other side of the city. In addition, it wasn't my style. Not that that really mattered. After a few days, I decided to try another approach to finding a good teacher. I learned of my future teacher not through his reputation as a martial artist, but his reputation as a doctor. This was a good sign, I thought, and then to add irony, he turned out to look exactly like an archetypical triad hatchet man. I had put word out among my students that I was looking for a good kung fu master, and would they please ask their friends if they knew of anyone. It was Julie from the Amsterdam-Rotterdam Bank class that came up with a name. She explained that he was her acupuncturist who had done a miraculous job curing her chronic back pain. She said that while Master Tsai was an excellent doctor, he also taught kung fu. I was a little skeptical. Although Master Chan in Hong Kong was both a good teacher and a physician, I had thus far met no one else that was in his league. Julie promised I wouldn't be disappointed and gave directions to his clinic. The address was only in the next district in a fairly modern and upscale neighborhood. The school was in the basement of a mixed residential and commercial apartment complex with a small convenience store around the corner and an MTV parlor across the alley. I had Julie phone and make an appointment for me, and, since he spoke no English, she filled in Master Tsai about the purpose of my visit and background. Like Master Chan's, Master Tsai's school was divided between a small examination room and a kung fu training area. The training hall was clean and had modern, high-impact foam rubber flooring. There was a temple to Guanggong and a weapons rack stocked with an assortment of unusual halberds. Throughout my travels, I had an eye out for a good sword to bring back as a souvenir. Mostly I found cheap reproductions that I wouldn't trust to use even in forms. I strolled over to one of the racks for a closer look. These weren't reproductions. They were custom-made from combat-worthy steel and sharp. This guy had guts. Practicing with such unusual weapons that had live blades was dangerous. One mistake and you could lop off an ear or take off enough of a calf to make a sandwich. Bench press, barbells, and punching bag rounded off the equipment inventory. There were several college-aged students milling about. Each was dressed rather formally in a clean black kung fu pants and sashes. Everyone went bare-chested. One of the students, a younger boy around 15, with a friendly open face, came up and smiled. He introduced himself by patting his chest proudly and saying, "Afu." I patted my chest and said my name. He then beckoned me to take a seat in the examination room. There were several stools arranged around a desk, and Afu pulled out one opposite mine and just sat there smiling and looking at me as if he were about to tell me a funny story. But Afu couldn't speak a word of English, and even if he could, he would have been too embarrassed to. I looked around the room, which consisted of a table and shelves full of acupuncture equipment, needles, cups, herbs, roots, and of course, a little plastic statue of a man covered in lines and spots, each numbered in minuscule Chinese characters. Above the shelves were hung 8x10 glossy photographs. These were professional promotional photos, most taken during stage performances. Master Tsai and several others were shown in silken kung fu costumes doing martial arts stunts. One showed Master Tsai breaking concrete slabs with a palm. Another showed him bending 3 spears whose points were placed on his throat, and the ends of which were held by 3 burly men. A few minutes later, Master Tsai came into the clinic. He was bare-chested, which revealed a powerful physique. His shoulders and arms were thick and heavy, and his chest was huge. As he sat behind the desk, I examined his hands and noticed they were large and rough, with calluses on the knuckles. On the back of his right hand was a large callus that was swollen to the size of an egg. I guessed him to be in his late 30s. His way of moving spoke of power, and I thought I felt a tremor through the ground when he walked. His face was broad and flat, with full lips and heavy hooded eyes that gave him the appearance of being perpetually pissed off. He looked exactly like the Hollywood image of a Chinese hitman. He barked something at Afu, who went scurrying out of the room, to return minutes later with a tray on which sat tiny unglazed clay teapots and thimble-sized teacups. This was the format for drinking the expensive tea, some brands fetching upwards of $200 an ounce. Afu poured the tea, and Master Tsai lifted his cup. Tsui. Cheers. I followed suit. He made no attempt to speak English, and I made no attempt to speak Chinese. We sat while Afu, smiling expectantly, glanced back and forth. I could sense from his body language that Master Tsai did not feel the need to demonstrate any moves or sell me in any way. I wasn't going to act like a fool and ask any questions either. Afu refilled the tiny cups. Tsai's face betrayed no emotion, and we sat, the three of us, in silence. Although no words were exchanged, there were important communications taking place. Among primates, the most dominant of a group can be recognized by his lack of body movements. The lower-ranking members would be constantly making submissive behavior gestures, such as nodding and bowing their heads, making nervous grooming gestures with the hands and feet, smiling and grimacing with eyes lowered. This was to soothe the dominant male's aggression. Failure to make submissive gestures is a challenge to the alpha male's position as top dog, and he would fly into a violent rage to erase any doubts about his dominance. Observe the applicant at a job interview, quick to smile and nod his head, grooming gestures of straightening his tie and brushing his hair, the lowered face. Master Tsai sat there motionless. Strength, power, and confidence emanated from him. Most men would be uncomfortable with the situation. There would be the urge to gesture, to be amiable, or bounce a leg nervously under the table. I fought those urges. After about 10 minutes, I could sense that Master Tsai was becoming impatient. I spoke in English with accompanying pantomime that I would have to go, look at non-existent watch, that I would have Julie telephone for another appointment, hold imaginary phone to ear, and ask her to interpret, mimic transcribing notes on a pad. Master Tsai grunted an affirmative and stood up. Afu jumped to his feet and bowed before showing me to the door. I bowed using the traditional fist-in-palm salute to a master. 师傅, 谢谢您. Thank you, and I left. The week following my meeting with Master Tsai was a bank holiday, and so it was 2 weeks later that I again taught the secretaries at the A&R Bank. So how was your meeting with Master Tsai? Asked Julie. She had already spoken with him and knew everything that happened, but in traditional Chinese style was first waiting for my version of events before revealing her prior knowledge. Okay, I guess. We didn't say much since neither of us spoke the other's language. I'm not sure he likes me very much. Oh, no, that's not true. He said he likes you, and he wondered why you didn't come back. I was surprised he wanted me to go see him again. Well, that's nice, but I think he might be liumang, a gangster. Ha, no, he's not gangster. He just looked mean, like your friend Dale. Have tiger face outside, but pussycat inside. I had regaled the class with stories and photos of Dale, the wild man of the menacing swamp, hunter, trapper, and expert shot with a pump-action 12-gauge. Well, you've got a point. Maybe I should go back and see him again. Yes, I know he will like you. Go back and study with him. The next week, I started training under Master Tsai Ren Ju.